I can't believe you kissed him. The word struck me like a slap across the face, echoing through the hollow silence of my office. I froze mid-step, my fingers tightening instinctively around the edge of the doorframe, as if it could steady me. James stood there, framed by the soft glow of the desk lamp. His voice, low yet trembling, carried a mix of fury and heartbreak that made my stomach churn. I didn't need to ask what he meant. The memory had already begun clawing its way back. Last night's gala. The swirl of champagne, bubbles sparkling under the dim golden light. The electric hum of conversation fading as my boss, Mr. Callahan, leaned in closer. I could still feel the ghost of his hand brushing mine, warm and deliberate, his lips hesitating for just a heartbeat before they claimed mine. James, I whispered, my voice faltering. His face was pale, yet his bloodshot eyes burned, glistening with a pain that cut deeper than words ever could. His jaw clenched tight, and the faint twitch in his temple betrayed the effort it took to remain composed. My gaze darted downward, but I couldn't escape the sight of his trembling hands, balled into fists at his sides. He was breaking, right in front of me. I can explain, I began, my voice weak, trembling like a violin string stretched too far. Explain, he spat, his voice cracking. Explain how you sold yourself for a promotion? A corner office? Was it worth it, Emily? His words struck like shards of glass, cutting through every excuse I had rehearsed in my head. Tears welled in his eyes, threatening to spill, but he blinked them back. He was too proud to let me see him cry, too hurt to look away. My heart ached at the sight of his chest rising and falling with shallow, labored breaths. He was unraveling, and it was my fault. Guilt coursed through me like poison, hot and heavy. But beneath it lay a terrible, undeniable truth. A part of me, no, most of me, had wanted this. The kiss, the attention, the thrill of power and validation that Mr. Callahan offered in ways James never could. But now, standing in the suffocating weight of my husband's heartbreak, the thrill was gone. It was replaced by shame, settling like lead in my chest. I looked at James again, his lips pressed into a thin line, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of my betrayal had crushed something vital within him. My voice broke, words refusing to form. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. James exhaled a shaky breath, his eyes meeting mine for what felt like the last time. Was it worth it, Emily? He asked again, softer now, his voice barely above a whisper. This time, I had no answer, because I already knew it. The days that followed were suffocating, a blur of silence, so heavy it felt like I was drowning in it. James barely looked at me, let alone spoke. His presence in the house was ghost-like, an aching reminder of the man I betrayed. The master bedroom, once warm and full of us, now felt cavernous and cold. He had moved into the guest room, closing the door as if to shut me out of his life completely. I buried myself in work, letting the chaos of deadlines and meetings distract me from the wreckage at home. My boss, Mr. Callahan, oblivious to the silent storm tearing through my marriage, continued to summon me into his office. His words were like sugar-coated daggers, sweet but sharp, praising my dedication while dangling promotion in front of me like a golden carrot. I hated myself for still wanting it, but guilt was a relentless companion. Every stolen glance at James, his hollow eyes, the slight stoop of his once confident shoulders, was like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. At night, when the house was quiet and the walls seemed to whisper accusations, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that had led us here. I wanted to confess, to tell him everything and beg for his forgiveness, but the words stayed lodged in my throat, tangled with the shame I couldn't face. Then, one night, the tension reached its breaking point. I sat alone in the kitchen, the dim light above the stove casting long shadows across the room. A half-empty glass of wine sat in front of me, the dark red liquid swirling lazily as I tried to drown the ache inside. The sound of James's footsteps startled me. I turned to see him standing in the doorway. His face was pale, his features drawn tight with exhaustion. His hair was disheveled, and the faint stubble on his jaw made him look older, as if the weight of my betrayal had aged him overnight. Without a word, he stepped forward and placed a folded piece of paper on the counter. Divorce papers. The sight of them hit me like a punch to the gut. I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice hollow, devoid of the warmth it once held. His hands, rough and trembling, gripped the edge of the counter as if it were the only thing keeping him standing. I loved you, Emily, but you've destroyed us. His words shattered me. My heart felt as though it had been ripped from my chest, leaving an empty, aching void. I reached for him, desperate, but he stepped back. His eyes, once so full of love, were cold and distant, as though I was a stranger. Was it worth it? He asked, his voice breaking ever so slightly. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. The truth was too raw, too painful. I didn't know if it was worth it. All I knew was that I had lost him, and maybe I had lost myself too. The promotion came a few weeks later, wrapped in the shallow trappings of success. A corner office bathed in sterile sunlight, a bigger paycheck promising luxuries I no longer cared for, and a title that felt hollow. My colleagues envied me. I could see it in the glances they cast my way, the murmurs about my ambition. Their admiration was like smoke, insubstantial, fleeting, suffocating. But none of it mattered. Not the office, not the money, not the accolades. The emptiness inside me was a cavern no amount of professional success could fill. My life had become a polished facade, gleaming on the outside, crumbling within. I spent hours at my desk, surrounded by sleek furniture and stacks of papers. Yet all I could see were the fragments of the life I had destroyed. James's absence haunted me. The quiet hum of the air conditioning reminded me of the silence he left behind, the way his presence had once filled every corner of our home. One afternoon, as I sat staring blankly at my computer screen, an email notification broke the monotony. My heart skipped when I saw his name, James Callahan. For a brief, foolish moment, I allowed myself to hope. But as I opened the email, that hope shattered like glass. No subject, no greeting, just one devastating line. I hope it was worth losing me. I read the words over and over, each repetition carving a deeper wound into my soul. My hand trembled as I set the mouse aside, my vision blurring as tears pooled in my eyes. I tried to blink them away, but they spilled over, hot and relentless, tracing salty paths down my cheeks. No title, no paycheck, no fleeting admiration was worth losing James. But the damage was done, the story written, and I had no one to blame but myself.